On November 16, 1951, as the morning fog lifts from Portsmouth Harbor, Dennis Campbell boards HMS Illustrious, carrying a single, simple sketch, a flight deck angled 10 degrees to port. It appears unremarkable, yet within 18 months this quiet line will save more naval aviators' lives than any weapon system ever invented, proof that the right piece of design can outfight fear on the deck. Campbell confronts a brutal ledger in 12 months. 43 aircraft lost, 17 pilots killed, dozens maimed, every loss in the final 30 seconds of flight. The numbers aren't just frightening, they pinpoint the choke point: landing design and procedure. From fear to fix, he pushes for changes that turn 30 deadly seconds into a second chance. The kill zone arrives when a 30-ton jet at 140 miles per hour must catch a wire, while a steel barrier sits 60 feet ahead. In 1951, U.S. carrier aviation logged 776 Class A mishaps, more than 2 per day. The issue is systemic. Straight decks force power on landings with slow spool-up. The breakthrough is an angled deck of 10 degrees. Miss the wire, add power, go around, no barrier, just sky, ocean, and a second chance. It was peacetime, yet the Korean War magnified the bloodshed. USS Boxer logged 7 barrier crashes in one deployment. Princeton lost 9 aircraft in 4 weeks. On straight-deck carriers, a missed wire meant one outcome: hit the barricade at full power or plow into parked aircraft, igniting a fireball that could kill a dozen men in a few seconds. Every bolter was a countdown, and to save lives, the deck itself had to change. The jet age arrived, but carrier landings lagged behind. The Panther touched down at 40 knots faster than the Hellcat, while jet engines needed 7 seconds to spool an eternity when sinking at 20 feet per second. On the port quarter landing signal, officers waved paddles frantically, a sign the system was nearing its safety limits. By the time a pilot noticed the error, physics had already sealed his fate. From admirals to engineers and test pilots, everyone knew carrier aviation had hit its breaking point. Jets were the future, but the present was killing people. What no one in Portsmouth expected, the crazy idea would be mocked by experts until the breakthrough emerged from refusing to accept a bad design. Breakthroughs do not come from committees or wind tunnels, but from one person refusing to let good men die for a design flaw. In 1945, Lieutenant Commander William P. Ron made the first jet landing aboard USS Wake Island. The FR-1 Fireball touched down at 90 knots, 20 knots faster than piston fighters, its arresting cables screaming as they absorbed the energy. The landing succeeded. The warning was ignored, planting the seed for a radical change in carrier landings. By 1950, every major navy faced the same crisis. Jets delivered speed and altitude, but slow throttle response turned final approach into a trap. Propeller aircraft could chop throttle on the LSO's cut and literally drop onto the deck. Jets could not. They had to land power on, making any missed wire far more dangerous. Jet aircraft had to land power on because throttle response was too slow, turning the final seconds into a no-escape gamble. Pilots approached with engines already spooled, locked into landing. If they missed, they could not climb quickly. On straight decks, 4 arresting wires crammed into 60 feet squeezed tiny errors into catastrophe. That doctrinal gap pointed toward angling the deck, finally giving pilots a true second chance. Behind the pilots lay a steel barricade, then parked aircraft fuel trucks and ammo carts, turning the deck into a cramped combat zone. The math was brutal. A Panther landing at 125 knots covered 211 feet per second, leaving almost no time to correct. 4 arresting wires across 60 feet, miss them all, and the barrier awaits. But if a miss simply meant adding power, climbing away, and trying again, that mindset paved the way for the angled deck. On a straight deck, missing all 4 wires leaves only 2.1 seconds before the barricade. The barricade sometimes works, but when it fails, 30 tons of fuel and ordnance plow into parked aircraft at 100 miles per hour. Captain Bruce Williams watched 11 men die in March 1951, proof that containment isn't prevention. The only fix is design, the angled deck that grants a built-in second chance. The report reads: the aircraft hit the barrier at full power. The barrier separated. The aircraft then plowed into 6 parked Corsairs. The resulting fire reached aviation gasoline stores, destroying 14 aircraft, killing 11 personnel, and injuring 23. Carrier operations were suspended for 48 hours. In response, the fleet doubled down on a single fix: better barriers, a band-aid that ignored the root cause, and set the stage for the angled deck breakthrough to come. The British pursued the flex deck, a rubberized surface meant to catch jets without landing gear. Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown completed 40 landings and called it fundamentally sound, yet privately bloody terrifying. The Americans doubled down on stronger barricades, with the Bureau of Aeronautics spending $3.22 million. But barriers merely contained the damage. They did not prevent approach phase crashes, pointing to the need for a system that gives pilots a safe go-around option. The Bureau of Aeronautics spent $3.22 million on the Davis barrier, a system able to stop a 25,000-pound aircraft at full throttle. When it worked, it was impressive. When it failed, the devastation was total. Stronger barriers did not prevent crashes, they only contained them. Senior aviators knew the root cause was the flight deck and landing procedure itself, exactly what Captain William T. Rasher had warned in 1945. Rasher names the hard truth: forcing all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with zero margin is a disaster recipe. Our carriers were built for prop planes landing at 70 knots with last-second aborts, while jets land at 130 knots and cannot abort. The physics of the final 30 seconds turn tiny errors into barrier strikes. The way out is not stronger barriers, but adapting the ship to the airplane. The angled deck, if you miss the wires you go around, turns despair into a second chance. We are trying to land 1952 aircraft on 1942 ships, a mismatch that keeps killing people until it is fixed. Everyone agreed on the problem, yet nobody solved it. The British tried flex decks, the Americans tried stronger and backup barriers with emergency nets, the French tried reducing aircraft weight, none of it worked. The breakthrough begins only when we ask, what if the deck geometry itself is wrong? Accidents kept climbing because of one unquestioned assumption: the landing area must be parallel to the ship's axis. Dennis Campbell, a so-called bureaucrat, drew a simple angled line and said, "Turn it." Paint trials replaced arguments. Results showed negligible drift and gave pilots a safe go-around. Despite resistance, the United States approved tests on a carrier, paving the way for conversion. The angled deck didn't just cut accidents, it restored calm and literally gave pilots their lives back. Born on November 13, 1907 in Southsea, England, Campbell grew up in a seafaring culture that instilled discipline and service. He entered the Royal Navy in 1925 as a midshipman, treating naval life as a calling. In September 1931, he qualified as a pilot, bridging the era of fabric biplanes and modern steel decks. From that point, he saw naval aviation not as a gentleman's pastime, but as a technical profession, demanding engineering precision, the seed that would later grow into the angled deck revolution. During World War II, he flew the obsolete Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers that nonetheless helped cripple the Bismarck. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross, even though nobody called him a genius or a visionary. After the war, he was assigned to the Ministry of Supply as the Deputy Chief Royal Navy Representative, a desk role managing the technical liaison between the Navy and civilian contractors, quiet work with decisive influence. He had no engineering degree, no advanced titles, just paperwork, tracking schedules, coordination meetings, signing requisitions. But Dennis Campbell had what credentials cannot teach: he could not ignore dead pilots. In 1951, he stood at the funeral of test pilot Michael Mick Lithgow, killed when his jet hit the barricade on HMS Implacable. From that moment, paperwork could wait. He vowed, "This ends now." Campbell's former student, 23 years old, nailed a perfect approach and speed, but floated 6 foot and missed every wire. The barricade failed. The aircraft disintegrated. His widow was 5 months pregnant. At the graveside, Campbell said, "This is insane." From that human loss, he resolved to stop good pilots from dying for a zero-margin design. We're murdering them with our own equipment. A pilot can do everything right and still die because 60 feet isn't enough margin. At funerals, officers often say the right words and move on. Campbell didn't. He obsessed, pulled every accident report, interviewed landing signal officers, and studied approach patterns. Not an engineer, he did what determined non-engineers do. He drew the solution until despair became a design. On the train from Portsmouth to London, Campbell's notebook sketches crystallize a simple aim: give pilots more room where it matters most. If you can't make it longer, make it wider. If you can't make it wider due to a fixed beam, then angle the deck. An angled deck turns a missed wire into a go-around instead of a barricade hit, and the next step is a painted trial to measure drift, prove it fast, and decide decisively. He sketched a flight deck angled 10 degrees to port, shifting the end of the landing path into open water. Now, if a pilot missed the wires, they would push the throttle, climb away, and try again. No barricade, no parked aircraft, no catastrophic collision, only air, ocean, and a second chance. Campbell's angled deck idea felt so simple it seemed stupid, either brilliant or a glaring oversight. On August 7, 1951, he convened a Ministry of Supply meeting with Louis Boddington, Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, and 6 senior aviation engineers. The concept now faced evidence-based scrutiny: calculate it, measure it, test it. If it held up, it would not just refine procedure, it would save lives. Campbell opened his briefcase, revealing the angled deck sketch. The room erupted in shock. "That's completely illegal," declared Commander James, the senior flight operations specialist, calm but firm. His words hit like a law of physics. The International Air Navigation Convention requires all flight operations to align with the vessel's axis. In that instant, innovation collided head-on with regulation, and the battle for change had just begun. They reject the idea as violating maritime aviation law forged over 15 years, dismissing it as amateur. Campbell expected resistance, not contempt. Technical objections stack up, carriers pitch and roll about the keel. An angled deck forces approaches across that motion, raising drift and risk. That pressure sets the stage for a demand: show the math and prove it on deck. They will be fighting drift constantly. The landing area will be moving underneath them in ways they cannot anticipate. You will increase crashes, not reduce them. Tension rises. Lieutenant Commander Goodhart begins to respond, but Boddington raises a hand: show me the math. Emotion yields to evidence: model, an 8-degree angle, 12-degree rolls, and a 30-second approach window. Shared conclusion: measure or dismiss. Paint an angled outline and run simulated touch, and go for 1 week. Let data speak, not belief. You say pilots will fight drift, then calculate it. Boddington frames the problem: an 8-degree angled deck, the ship rolling 12 degrees, measure differential drift over a 30-second approach. The room falls silent, no one has numbers. Boddington decides, then we test it. The debate pivots from opinion to experimental science: paint the angled deck, run simulated approaches, let the data speak. Boddington proposes a painted, angled deck outline on HMS Triumph for a live feasibility test. Within 1 week, they will fly simulated touch and go approaches to measure drift. If the problem is real, data will show it. If it is mere theorizing, they will know. Rear Admiral Slattery warns that crashes would end both careers. Noted, Sir. Boddington replies and then smiles. And if it works, implying a path to stop letting pilots die for bad design. Then we stop killing pilots who did everything right. Beginning in September 1951, HMS Triumph sailed from Portsmouth with an angled deck made of paint, no structural change, just a white outline. For 3 weeks, Navy pilots flew continuous touch and goes, treating the painted line as a real deck edge. The low-risk setup enabled rapid deployment and precise measurement of both flying behavior and pilot psychology. Core principle: stop arguing in theory, measure, and let the data decide. During the painted deck trials, the drift problem simply did not exist. Pilots adapted after 2 landings, then discovered something greater than geometry: freedom. With no terror of a looming barrier, they had a second chance to go around. Lieutenant Peter Chilton wrote he came in too high, floated past the wires, and for the first time in his career he wasn't terrified. He just poured on power and climbed away. No barrier waiting to kill me, just clean air and a second chance. It felt like getting my life back. By October, painted deck trials proved the concept worked, but the hard part was persuading the institution. HMS Triumph was British, yet the largest problem sat with the Americans, whose pilots were dying at twice the Royal Navy's rate. From data to doctrine, the mission was to make that second chance the new operating standard. The US Navy was not keen on British officers telling them how to land. On September 14, 1951, at Patuxent River, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown, the Royal Navy's chief test pilot, faces 40 American test pilots weighing whether to trust him. When Brown asks for hands about barrier crashes, the room reveals a brutal truth. He opens his case and shows an angled deck sketch, a simple line that grants a second chance. Amid objections, Brown refuses to argue. He demands a test. "Show me the math, then we test it," becomes policy. Paint an angled deck on Midway. The meeting ends with careers staked on a painted line. He is the man who has landed more aircraft types than anyone in history, holder of every British naval aviation record that matters. And right now, none of that matters, because he is about to tell the United States Navy that their carriers are designed wrong for the jet age. Gentleman Brown begins pulling the room out of its comfort zone. Records do not save lives. Second chances do. Paint the angled deck first, weld it later. Let the data speak, and the pilots have already shown it within 2 landings. They adapt, turning fear into a second chance. In a tense briefing, the question, "How many of you hit the barricade in the past 12 months?" raises 7, then 12, then 15 hands. How many know someone who died? Every hand goes up. Brown opens his briefcase. "What I'm about to show you will sound insane, but I've made 63 landings on it, and I'm standing here." The room shifts from fear to possibility, a simple change that turns a fatal miss into a safe go-around, to be proven by test, not talk. Brown asks the room to listen, then pins Campbell's sketch, a flight deck, angled 8 degrees to port. Objections explode, land sideways, LSO visibility, proximity to the island. Brown lets the noise die, acknowledges every concern, then delivers the pivot. They tested it. Proof replaces fear. Adaptation beats doctrine. At the start, Brown states the simple truth of the angled deck. If you miss the wires, you do not die, you push the throttle and go around. That single operational change replaces fear with a second chance. Commander Harold Buell stands carrying the weight of experience since 1943, embodying the old straight-deck doctrine that now must face test data and survival-first thinking. A heated objection claims the proposal breaks 8 years of combat-proven doctrine. Brown reframes the fight. "Stop dying for a design flaw." He exposes the mismatched jets on straight decks built for Corsairs and Hellcats that could chop, throttle, and drop. The root problem is the last 30 seconds trap with no second chance. The angled deck creates one miss, the wires add power, go around. Silence turns to action. Paint the lines, test, measure, and let the data decide. Jets cannot do that, which means you are forcing 1952 aircraft into 1942 procedures, and people are dying for it. The angled deck does not break doctrine. It adapts the ship to the jet. Rear Admiral Apollo Susk steps forward, confirming he has observed the Triumph trials. The core insight is simple. Miss the wires, add power, and go around. A second chance turns fatal endings into recoverable approaches, moving the idea from paint line proof to fleet adoption. A senior aviator backs Brown. The angled deck concept works, and he recommends parallel paint trials on USS Midway. Pride objects, citing the Davis barrier's 98.7% success rate. Brown slices through 98.7% of what? The room reframes the problem. Barrier metrics do not equal pilot survival. The path forward is clear. Paint trials first, structural conversion only if proven. Safety is the hard gate. If even one added casualty appears, terminate. The debate ends. Action begins. Within days, pilots, not arguments, will decide. Brown's argument exposes a lethal blind spot in the metrics, counting barrier impacts, ignores panic, turnaways, and deliberate ocean ditchings. The room splits in two. The debate pivots to the real aim: engineering a true second chance. Authorizing painted deck trials on Midway turns shouting into field science, putting pilot lives ahead of doctrine. Rear Admiral Suchek silences the room and orders angled deck trials on USS Midway using painted lines and simulated landings. The criteria are explicit. If it works structurally, convert one carrier. If it fails, bury the idea. Core command principle: stop losing pilots to a design that can be tested and fixed with evidence. In a room strung tight, Pride stands silent for 10 seconds, then authorizes midway trials under a brutal condition. If there is even one additional casualty, the program ends, and everyone involved is finished. Suchek nods agreed. The meeting ends. Brown packs his briefcase, knowing he has just wagered his entire career on a single painted line. Within 90 days, Midway's painted deck trials proved a life-saving principle: miss the wires, go around, no barricade waiting. The results were so decisive that the U.S. Navy converted USS Antietam into the world's first true angled deck carrier. And when the first jet touched down on that real angled deck, naval history turned a page. Subscribe and ring the bell. The next landing shows how a single line can save countless lives. On January 12, 1953, off Guantanamo Bay, Commander Hal Buell lines up his F-9 F-5 Panther behind USS Antietam. It is his 43rd carrier landing, but the first on a real angled deck. A gust lifts him high, he runs long, and the hook skips every wire. On a straight deck, that means steel and fire. On the angled deck, it means throttle up and try again. 23 seconds later, he traps the 3-wire. Fear gives way to a new routine miss, go around live. An angled deck sponson of 8 degrees is welded to the port side, promising a second chance safety margin. Buell trained his entire career to catch the wires or hit the barricade. Mistrusts it, fear saved him twice. He drops the gear trims and calls the ball Panther Ball 3.2, Roger Ball. On an angled deck, a missed wire is no longer catastrophe. It is a go-around. Buell chooses to trust the new procedure, proof that adaptation, not bravado, saves lives. The landing signal officer answers, as Buell's approach looks textbook, until a sudden gust lifts him by about 6 feet. On a straight deck, being high means an immediate wave-off burn, fuel reset, and try again. Today, the LSO says nothing, because on an angled deck, high is not a catastrophe, it is a correction window. Power stays on deck edge, leads to open air, and a bolter becomes a safe go-around. One quiet change in geometry turns fear into margin and failure into a second chance. Buell eases the nose, bleeds off a little altitude, but now he is long on a straight deck, he would likely miss the wires. This is the moment when panic usually takes over, and desperate stick and throttle corrections cause crashes. Instead, Buell obeys the briefing. If you miss, you climb. The deck is clear. Trust it. The wheels slam, he bounces once, yet he does not snatch at the controls. On an angled deck, that single bounce is not a death sentence, but a second chance. Add power, go around, try again. A design that forgives human margins, turns a near accident into a lesson, and saves lives. His tailhook skips the first, second, third, and fourth wires, he misses them all. On a straight deck, the barricade would already be shredding the jet. Here, there is no barricade, only open deck and clear air. Buell slams the throttle. The J-48 engine spools in 6 seconds. The angled deck gives him a second chance climb, re-enter the pattern, land safely. From one moment, we see why the right design saves lives. A bolter becomes a lifeline. In an eternity that feels like a gift, the Panther lifts away. 23 seconds later, Buell is back in the pattern, calm, methodical. On the second approach, he catches the 3-wire perfect landing. He steps out, shaking not from fear but from years of pressure suddenly gone. In his autobiography, he credits the angled deck with giving pilots a second chance. A veteran tailhook pilot calls angled deck landings sheer bliss, confessing that for the first time in his career, the fear of dying on every approach vanished. Over the next 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 completed 1,327 landings on Antietam's angled deck, turning relief into data and data into doctrine. They logged 8 bolters, missed wires that required go-arounds. On a straight deck, those 8 moments might have become 5 barrier crashes, 2 destroyed aircraft, and 1 or 2 pilots killed. On the angled deck, 0 crashes, 0 destroyed aircraft, 0 injuries. The data is undeniable proof that the second chance geometry turns failure into safety. Before the angled deck, from 1950 to 1952, U.S. Navy carriers averaged 647 Class A mishaps per year, with landing accidents making up 52% of losses. After implementation from 1955 to 1957, Class A mishaps fell to 321 per year. and landing accidents dropped to 19%. That is, 75% fewer landing accidents and 80% fewer barrier-related fatalities. But numbers cannot capture a heartbeat. Lieutenant James Davidson's story does multiple approaches, missed wires, then a safe go-around, and a final trap because an angled line turned catastrophe into a second chance. On March 8, 1953, Davidson nursed a damaged Panther back to USS Antietam. Hydraulic failure, no flaps, landing speed 20 knots too fast. On a straight deck, he would have ditched rather than risk a barrier strike at 145 knots. But Antietam had an angled deck. Davidson made 4 approaches. Each bolter was not a death sentence, but a second chance to stabilize, adjust, and try again, until he finally caught the wire and rolled to a safe stop. Data and design turned terror into margin. After missing every wire on several approaches, Davidson finally catches the 4-wire at 142 knots, the fastest successful carrier landing to that point, and stops with 11 feet of deck remaining. 6 months later, he writes to Campbell thanking him for an impossible idea that saved his life. "My daughter was born last month. The angled deck didn't just save a pilot, it gave a family back its future." A pilot's thank you letter captures the moral core of the angled deck, saving good aviators from a bad design. From Ark Royal in 1955 to Clemenceau and Melbourne, adoption spread rapidly. By 1957, every major Western carrier either had an angled deck or was being refitted. Beyond statistics, testimonies reveal lifted fear and real second chances, proof that adapting ships to jets, not jets to ships, reshaped doctrine and saved lives. Initially, the Soviets rejected the angled deck. A string of crashes on the straight-deck carrier Varyag forced a quiet adoption in 1959. Declassified records in 1993 show landing accidents fell by 68% within 6 months. Yet numbers are only half the story. Pilots' testimonies, being able to bolter and go around instead of plowing into a barrier, remain the strongest proof that a second chance saves lives and reshapes doctrine. Captain John Moore, flying from USS Coral Sea, made 947 carrier landings between 1954 and 1973. On straight decks, he boltered 62 times, 62 potential barrier crashes, 62 chances to die or kill sailors working forward. Instead, the angled deck idea turned each miss into a second chance: power up, climb away, try again. Moore's testimony proves the human side of Campbell's innovation, a simple, angled line that kept pilots alive. Pilots of the same generation remember friends lost to barricades in the 1950s. They are alive because Dennis Campbell drew a single angled line and refused to be silent. Trials proved that when a pilot misses the wires, he simply adds power and goes around turning a death sentence into a second chance. Over the following years, data made the case undeniable. By 1975, the angled deck had become so universal that younger pilots did not even know carriers once worked differently. It is no longer an innovation. It is how carriers are supposed to work, and a reminder to redesign systems around human survival. An innovation is complete when it disappears into daily practice. The angled deck quietly saved countless lives, yet Dennis Campbell never chased fame. What he chose to do after that breakthrough, doubling down on people and safety, will surprise you even more. Before we go there, if you know a veteran or anyone who loves military history, please share this story with them. These stories matter, resets the stakes, then pivots to the quiet aftermath. Dennis Campbell never chased headlines, never gave a press interview about the angled deck. Recognition came anyway. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1954, and he stood at the launch of HMS Ark Royal, watching a simple line on paper become steel doctrine and lives saved. From the very first carrier designed from the keel up with an angled deck, reporters sought Dennis Campbell's words. He refused the spotlight, redirecting credit to Louis Boddington and the Farnborough engineers. When the United States Navy invited him to the commissioning of USS Forrestal in 1955, the first American supercarrier with an angled deck, steam catapults, and an optical landing aid, Campbell sent his regrets. His humility matched his impact: innovation that saves lives over personal fame, turning painted trials into baseline design. A quiet choice reveals the man. At a modest funeral, Dennis Campbell stands for a Royal Navy lieutenant killed in a training helicopter crash, unrelated to his work, because that officer had served under him in 1943, and he believed you always attend funerals for your people. Leadership to Campbell meant showing up when it hurts. In 1957, he received the CBE for services to naval aviation. The citation was 2 sentences, brief words for a lifetime of saved lives. His humility never dimmed his duty: honor people first, then pursue ideas that keep them alive. That is the standard worth carrying forward. After the medals, Campbell kept the citation in a drawer because lives mattered more. Retiring in 1960, he joined Hawker Siddeley to shape VTOL safety, obsessing over failure modes and layering redundancies that sometimes irked designers but protected pilots. The same spirit that angled a deck re-angled cockpit thinking design so that one mistake does not cost a life. Dennis Campbell slowed every design review with one relentless question: what happens if this fails at night in bad weather? When engineers said the odds were 1 in 10,000, he replied, "What does the pilot do when it happens?" He did not design for the average case. He designed for the one unlucky pilot. That human-first mindset birthed the angled deck: miss the wires, push power, go around a second chance by design, not by luck. Campbell passed on April 6, 2000 at the age of 92. The Times ran 4 paragraphs. The Guardian ran 6, both mentioned the angled deck, neither captured its meaning. Since 1953, every safe carrier landing carries the mark of one pilot who refused preventable deaths. True honor is not measured in paragraphs but in lives preserved. Today, a bolter means a calm go-around that legacy lives on. Share this story so the next person dares to draw their own line. Today, every aircraft carrier in the world uses an angled deck, even the Gerald R. Ford class with electromagnetic catapults and advanced arresting gear keeps the deck angled 8 degrees to port, exactly as Campbell drew in 1951. Each year, the United States Navy alone performs over 15,000 carrier landings. At that scale, the miss the wires go around philosophy saves countless lives. From a simple sketch to a global standard, the angled deck proves that technology evolves, but human-centered design must always come first. Bolter rate sits near 8%, about 200 missed wire approaches each year. Without the angled deck, those could become 1,200 barrier impacts. Lives saved, hundreds per year. Across 70 years, tens of thousands. This is not abstract. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black, of the U.S. Marine Corps, flew FA-18 off carriers from 1985 to 2007, a career built on the second chances and angled deck guarantees. In 2003, a naval officer wrote to Dennis Campbell's family. He had made 147 carrier landings and boltered 142 times 142 moments. He might have died on a straight deck. Instead, the angled deck gave him a second chance each time. That letter distills the whole revolution: turned fatal misses into safe go-arounds. Beyond engineering, it removed fear, saved lives, and became global doctrine because one person asked why not. A letter says, "Your father gave me 142 second chances. He gave me a career. He gave me a life." Dennis Campbell never replied he had been dead for 3 years. His son framed the letter because his father kept no awards. He would have kept the lesson. Instead, some breakthroughs do not come from experts. One angled line turned crashes into go-arounds, giving pilots a second chance. Legacy is measured in lives, not medals. History's real breakthroughs often come from the person who refuses the answer. That's how we've always done it. Captain Dennis Campbell was not an engineer or a test pilot. He was a persistent bureaucrat who could not ignore fallen friends and had the audacity to draw a single line and ask why not. That simple angled deck gave pilots a second chance, and across decades saved more lives than any Medal of Honor recipient. The lesson endures when lives are at stake. Courage is sometimes a pencil line, and the will to use it. A simple idea born on a train in a notebook from a single sketch reshaped naval warfare more than any high-tech weapon. Not from committees or labs, but from the courage to refuse silence when everyone said impossible. That stance created a second chance doctrine for pilots, and a new safety norm that became invisible by becoming standard. That is the real story, and that is why it matters. A future breakthrough may not come from an admiral or an engineer. It may come from one person who refuses the phrase, "That's how we've always done it." Dennis Campbell's angled deck idea, tilting the landing area by 8 degrees, turned a missed wire from a death sentence into a go-around and a second chance. Early paint line trials and then fleet conversions produced undeniable data, far fewer landing accidents and barrier fatalities. When evidence wins, innovation spreads until it becomes invisible. History often belongs not to the loudest voices, but to the one who will not let good people die for a fixable design flaw. If you see a widely accepted problem, test measure and ask why not.